there is no meeting scheduled for the month of December. The next meeting is scheduled for January of 12, at which time the results of the 2011 third quarter financial review will take place. In addition, we have changed the meeting schedule for next year. We're going to schedule 5 meetings. We're required to have a minimum of 4, but we're going to have 5. The second thing is the review of the audit committee charter. That was already done for us. We just did that, and that was the change. The change was 4 minimum meetings, 5 we're going to have. So that was changed at the government. Okay. Okay. You're on. Internal controls.
Internal controls. We are proposing as an action item today revisions, and I use that term very loosely, to the MTA's internal control guidelines. The last time this board reviewed its internal control guidelines was in 1990. So we have prepared for you today, it's in your book, the MTA's Enterprise Risk Management and Internal Control Guidelines. Basically what we are attempting to do is to take the MTA and each of its agencies and make sure as it relates to internal controls that we are all operating on the same page. We're using the same nomenclature, using the same risk assessment models, in many respects making sure that we are all following the same practices going forward.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any questions on the MTA revisions? Yes, we do. Well, it was already approved at governmental meetings. So
the charters themselves have historically has always gone through the corporate governance committee. If you look back initially, they have gone through there since their formation. So generally what happens is that a committee will review its charter. Those recommendations are then sent to corporate governance. The chair of each committee sits on corporate governance, and at that meeting those changes are moved forward. For some reason today the committees got flipped, so the charter was changed.
Okay. Can you give us a general idea as to any changes in those revisions?
Okay.
No, we just opened. We went through the work plan. The work plan is that there are going to be 5 scheduled meetings next year. The charter requires 4. That charter was just recommended to the board at the governmental meeting. We're now on the revisions to the MTA Internal Control Program, which is on the top of page 2. And
unfortunately, you know, in terms of giving like a comparison, they're really, I used the term earlier that it replaces what existed in 1990. It is literally as night and day. What existed in 1990, the prior guidelines, and I use that term very loosely, was basically a recitation of public officers law, basically saying that there would be an internal control program, that it's important, that somebody who no longer works here would be responsible for it. They actually named the person in the guidelines. So it really didn't have a lot of meat to it. So that's why you don't have a red line in here, because you go from a one-page document, which basically says, well, comply with the law, to what you have in front of you right now, which was really designed to bring the agencies and the MTA together into a single platform moving forward. So there are night and day differences between two. I do have the 1990 version here. It's a one-pager that I can hand out if you'd like to see it, but it's beyond, you know, trying to compare the two.
Well, on page 17, I think it says these guidelines, which are more detailed than Policy Directive 11008, among other things, provide a common nomenclature for each agency relating to assessing risk. 2, creates a single set of risk evaluation criteria
That's correct.
for all of the agencies. and establishes consistent testing requirements based upon overall risk ranking, and establishes minimum standards for vulnerability assessments, and describes the role and responsibility of the Enterprise Risk Management Committee.
That's right.
And that's pretty much the gist of the new.
Yeah, we're going from isolated internal control programs to truly a larger enterprise risk management environment in which a lot of the silos that currently exist, we're trying to break down and identify risks that occur not just within a particular agency or a particular department, but that exists across agencies and across departments. And that's why we're looking at this Enterprise Risk Management Committee to do that.
Okay. Any questions?
We do not do GAAP, correct?
We have GAAP financial statements. Our budgets are not on GAAP, though.
Now, this is embarrassing. If you were to ask Deloitte for a going concern list, could we on our financials get that?
I'm sure we could. Yes.
Based on revenues.
I think so too.
Made me feel a lot better.
Okay, any other questions regarding the internal control program that's now being, the revisions to it, which I've just outlined and summarized? Can I get a motion to approve, please? Get a second? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, David.
Okay.
David's going to brief us on the overall audit approach for the 2011 year-end audit and of the MTA's agencies.
Good afternoon. The first thing I'd like to do is I think we probably had the opportunity to introduce everybody to you on the engagement team that's here. But this is Glenn Friedrich. He's responsible for a good portion of, he's a partner, and he's responsible for a good portion of the audit of the various subsidiaries at the MTA. Jill Strohmeyer, you know, after you've done something for about 7 years, you know, and taken a short window, it takes probably a year to, you know, to change habits. She is the manager on headquarters portion of the audit, Metro North, FEMTAC, and TBTA. You have Jennifer Katz. I got that one right too. She's the audit on the manager on the audit of the Transit Authority and Sertoa. That's it. And then we have Darshan Patel, who's a senior manager, and he's really kind of, you know, responsible for lots of things here, but primarily for the audits of the federal financial assistance programs. In addition to the folks here, we have two other partners that are involved. Mike Malloy, he's responsible for, you know, basically the bus companies and the pension plan audits. And then we have, there's three other partners. Mike Fritz, who is the quality assurance partner. He's from the Ohio office. He's actually the technical person within the public sector for the firm. He is what we call the engagement quality review partner. And then we have Brian Lane, who is what we refer to as an enterprise risk auditor. But he's basically the guy that's responsible for reviewing your information systems relative to controls and applications. And then we have a number of other people assisting us, but we also have two other partners that's involved pretty materially. John Sobarski, who is he is a property and casualty actuary. He's responsible for helping us look at reserves for claims and judgments and basically claims and judgments. Then we have Ira Kastrinsky, who is a pension actuary that basically helps us when we do our audit procedures around the MTA pension plans and the disclosures and the amounts and the financial statements. what I'd like to do is, all of you've had an opportunity to review. Do you have the book? You didn't get the book? Nobody got the book?
Got it. I don't know whether they had time to review it.
Do you have copies?
I just stole it from that.
And now there's another one. Actually, we sent it to you separately because we don't share it with management, because there's some things in there that we, would basically kind of see for your eyes only, because there's a little bit of information about some of the details in the audit that we don't necessarily believe is totally appropriate to share with management before we start the audit.
Seriously believe they don't see it? Okay.
I don't. We hope that we really would hope that they wouldn't see it.
Doesn't go to management.
We don't purposely, we try to keep it from them. Now they're going to figure it out as we go along the process. But I'm saying a good bit of time before we begin the audit, it's probably not a good idea to give them a lot of lead time to understand some of the details of what we're doing. Well, what I'd like to do is spend just a few minutes talking about our overall approach to the audit. I want to talk through a few accounts with you, just to give you an example of some of the level of detail that we look at. And then I'd be glad to discuss anything that you'd like to discuss. I'd also like to use this meeting as our opportunity to hear from you, because you're the guys that we work for, and to the extent that you have some concerns, or if you have some issues you would like us to pay particular attention to, or you want to give us some direction, this is our opportunity to hear from you, and we're serious about hearing it. What we do is we go through, and actually the audit process is actually a continuous. I mean, it really is, because we have good relationships with management. I think we have a very good, what we call a friendly adversarial relationships. So when management has issues, they're pretty good to talk to us about those issues, and to the extent that they're considering things, they talk to us on a real-time basis, so that when things are completed, there's no surprises on either side, and that's a pretty healthy relationship, and we're pretty candid in our feedback with management as those issues arise. But what we do is we go through a process of identifying any changes, particularly in processes and controls and new businesses. We also go through a process of reviewing. For the MTA, it's a little hard, but we try to treat it very much as close to a public company as we can. We go through the press process and through the public release process to gather information that might bring something to our attention that we might not otherwise know. And then we go through a process of doing some fairly high-level analytics of the financial information. Now, we're also here on a quarterly basis, so that helps it, because we do a quarterly review of the financial statements, and that helps that analytical process, because we're doing it every quarter. But we go through that process to identify any significant changes in account balances or types of transactions. Once we do that, we go through, it's a fairly lengthy process of assessing the risk of misstatement to the financial statements. And we actually go through it on an account-by-account basis. And it's actually a discussion among all the members of the audit team, with some others that we choose to consult with. But basically, we brainstorm potentials for errors that could occur in the financial reporting process or in account balances, and we list all those out. And then we basically put some factors to them. It's about likelihood, the probabilities of things like that occurring. And then we go through a process of identifying controls that the organization has in place that would mitigate that risk, or that basically would control that risk or prevent, an error from occurring. We spend a few hours on each account balance in our brainstorming session. It takes a while. It takes a good little while for an organization like the MTA, and particularly since we're involved in audits of so many pieces of it. Now, some of it's consistent across the organization, and some of it's not, because there's different transaction classes that occur within the various components of the MTA. Once we identify the risk and the controls that are controlling those risks, then we develop a plan of testing those controls to make sure that they're working as they're intended to work. And then based upon all of that, we go through the process of doing that testing controls. And after we test controls, we determine, can we rely on the controls that's within the organization or can't we? And if we make a decision that we can rely upon certain controls, then there's a different level of testing, that the amounts in the financial statements versus a circumstance where we would conclude that we can't rely on the control and we have to rely totally on what we call substantive audit procedures. Now, sometimes we make a decision just to do substantive audit because, for example, it's just quicker. And it's more reliable to basically, for example, to confirm some things totally than it would be to test individual pieces of the account balance. But to be honest with you, that's rare. We take, for the most part, a fairly substantial control reliance approach. If you will turn to page 16 in your book. There is a list of items that we're going to pay particular attention to this year. That's why we don't share it with management. It's still a pretty high level, but we tend not to share that. For the most part, there's a lot of things that involve management judgments and accounting estimates. We also segregate the transaction types into two parts. Transactions that are subject to a normal, routine, day-to-day type of activity, like payroll. I mean, we're less concerned with than transactions, for example, the accruals for your other post-employment benefit expense, because that includes a lot of judgment and estimates in determining those amounts. So there is a very different approach to auditing those two types of transaction cycles. If you will turn to page 17, and this is just a little update on the BSC because you have asked us to look at it, and we continue to look at it, and we'll.
Is this the first year that this?
It's the first year that accounts that show in the financial statements will be subject to processing at the BSC. But we're continuing to do that. We have been through a good bit of work there. I mean, we've looked at all of their processes and work, at least the narratives of the processes and workflows, and have talked to a good bit of to management about those. And we've been through a step-by-step type of process about tell us how transactions are processed cradle to grave. So we've done that. Now we are, and actually this Thursday, is that right? Wednesday, we're going to kick off a process that we're actually going to go in there. We've got Brian Lane who's going to go there, and he's going to look at he's going to do a pretty critical review of the operations at the BSC, just to make sure we're all kind of at the same place and understanding. And then we're going to basically test those controls there to see if we can rely upon the operation. The BSC's had a few little hiccups, and we've been aware and notified and involved in observing how that thing's going on, and we continue to watch it, and we'll let you know what the results of what we do there, or how those results come out. By the way, there's a lot of information in here, and to the extent that you have any questions about it, please feel free to call us. On page 23, we talk about our risk assessment process, and then on page 24, we basically list out those areas where we're talking about the risk process that we went through. One of the things that that we will always pay attention to, because it's got a lot of judgment involved in it, and it's got some pretty technical accounting that goes on with it, is that your derivative transactions. So we will look at those every year, and we will involve our financial instrument specialist and reviewing the derivatives to you know,
Swaps and hedges and that?
all of that. Actually, we're looking, the big assumption is that the MTA uses hedge accounting for its swap transactions. And we're going to, you know, take a critical look to make sure that it continues to qualify as a hedging instrument. But we'll involve a number of specialists. We'll look at a lot of data and test a lot of the data, underlying management's assumptions, in coming to the conclusion that it's appropriate for a hedge. We'll do an independent analysis of it ourselves.
When we have a swap, do you look to see whether or not the security, underlying security, is safely or appropriately held?
Yes. Yes. Otherwise, you know, that gets into some of the hedge accounting issues also. And then we will, also there's disclosures of market values of derivatives that appear in the notes of the financial statements. There is a process for determining market value that's pretty complex. We will look at it, challenge it, and then we'll also independently do our own market valuation.
That's the thing, you know, that's under the hedge, you know.
Right.
That can wildly fluctuate.
It will, and it will, but it's, you know, the gap requires that there be a disclosure presented in the financial statements.
So that's contained in the notes?
It's in the notes. But it's a material disclosure. Pardon?
All the dead
rephrase
bodies are buried in the notes.
What my colleague meant.
The detail.
Well, you don't report changes in market value on the face of the financial statements. No. No. It's not the first time I've heard that. And then, you know, of course, the other post-employment benefits I've mentioned. I mean, we will involve our actuaries in reviewing. You have independent actuaries that does evaluation of that for purposes of helping you, assist you in determining the amount that should appear as an expense in the financial statements of liability. We will look at what they've done and, you know, and challenge the assumptions and the details. And we'll also test all the data that was given to the actuaries in them computing that expense item. The estimated liabilities arising from injuries to persons or claims and judgments. We all, you know, there is an actuarial calculation that's performed here, but there is, you know, there's a fairly rigorous process. Actually, it's one of the things that the MTA I consider does just very well, because there's a series of processes that they go through involving counsel and actuaries and management in determining the amounts that should be recorded in the financial statements. And, you know, and then there's a series of meetings with us to walk us through their processes and how they've done it. And, you know, we will involve our actuaries in looking at that process. And we also spend a good bit of time trying to identify any potential unrecorded amounts relative to that appear in the financial statements. And that's through discussions with attorneys, through reviews of correspondence, and just our observations throughout the audit. And then the fair and you know, the fair revenue that you know, we will go through a process. For example, I'll use the Transit Authority as an example. We actually independently acquire tickets, and you know, the tickets have a number on them. We basically will trace those tickets, and we will use and record those tickets, and then we will independently trace them into the system, because if that system is a very automated system, and the only beginning point is the sale of the ticket. And it's only independent information that you see.
For the sake of argument, that there are areas where reimbursement is required by the counties, the city, and the state. If, for example, the state of New York does not reimburse as it is supposed to, you put a note into the financial statement.
Well, let me say this. If there is a contract, now unfortunately, some of the issues with the state, and I'm aware of those, by the way, because you know, sometimes there's a contract, and where you have a contract, and there are amounts that are due to you. There will be an accrual that appears in the financial statements. There are some that are, however, subject to appropriation, and we recognize, the MTA recognize it once the appropriation is approved, and we will review the appropriation to make sure that those are properly recorded too. If there's not an appropriation and there's a handshake, sometimes we find those, right? But handshakes can only, be recognized whenever they write the check. But if there's a formal appropriation, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Not quite. One illustration, the New York State Insurance Fund,
Okay.
subject to, you're familiar with it, I see, is subject to a dry appropriation from the state, without which it would be insolvent. Do you report that?
There is it's kind of an overall decision that you make as an auditor about the ability of the organization to continue at a loss. I mean, for example, the MTA. I mean, absent significant. By the way, it's a good example. Absent the significant contributions are bad word, support from the state and city less than it used to be, more so the state. I mean, we would question whether or not the organization had the ability to continue to meet its obligations, correct?
I asked earlier.
And there would be a judgment made about that. So far, it hasn't been an issue. But to be quite honest with you, do we give a critical review to everything that's going on these days and do some analysis and some soul searching when we make a judgment about going concern? Sure. Does that answer? Okay. But there's a big judgment that goes in that. I mean, it's not, sometimes it's not just a clear-cut mathematical process that you can go through. But and that is an issue here. Any other questions?
One question I must
Sure.
ask before, although I know the answer, I think. It has been suggested, this being a public sector, it has been suggested by some that the MTA has two sets of books. I would ask you for the record to tell me whether or not that statement is correct.
Well, the answer is it has one set of financial statements, right? I mean, there's multiple things to get to a set of financial statements, and there's multiple ways of looking at things, such as bond resolutions or whatever. But they're all recorded out of this. It has one general ledger. It may have different bases for reporting various things, but it has one set of financial statements and one accounting, and one general ledger per organization. Right.
Any other questions for Dave and his?
I have to report one thing to you.
Okay.
On page 31, it's a copy of our peer review. I have to disclose that to you because we are performing an audit in accordance with government auditing standards, which requires us to have a peer review, and it requires us to disclose the results of that peer review to you. That concludes my formal remarks.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Have you, in the course of your audit, received full and unfettered cooperation from that?
Absolutely. And if we didn't, you would be the first we'd notify.
Just asking a question.
On the audit timetable, you have a category of meet with the audit committee. Is that this audit?
That's this audit. You're the only, yes. I mean, we meet with you before we will issue our report on the financial statements.
Because we just changed the number of meetings we have, so we have to.
I saw that, right. But that meeting will be consistent.
Yeah, we'll go it.
And we're cool quarter to quarter?
Yep.
I mean, that's another, okay. Now, I would ask of you, is there anything that you'd like for us to pay particular attention to or any concerns that you'd have?
Probably ask more questions than most.
John, did you hear his question? Okay. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, Mike, you're in for information technology.
My name is Wal Hebri. I'm the CIO at MTA headquarters and the BSC. I'm joined by my peers, the CIOs of the MTA agencies, all here to help me present and answer questions on our annual report to you. We have reduced this report, as you requested, from about 40-plus pages of very technical, boring language that is very hard to decipher into about 12 pages that we believe are meaningful to the point and probably provide a lot more value than the longer report. Given the time constraints, what I'd like to do is just cover the outline of the report and focus on one key area that we are particularly proud of and I think you would be very interested in. The report consists of three main sections: our enterprise IT initiatives, security oversight, and key control areas. The focus will be on enterprise IT initiatives, which are primarily our IT consolidation work that started back in March 2010, and so far we've had significant success with. The other two areas are very clearly outlined. Our areas have covered about 7 significant sections of IT. When all added together, they cover most of IT. The first one is applications. We have at the MTA over 600 applications today. We have worked together as a team, the CIOs and I. We've eliminated redundant applications, several redundant applications, and we have also taken a hard look at some of the support agreements, particularly one for one of our security systems. We were looking to sign up with a brand name vendor to do a full maintenance of that, the IESS system, but instead we took it in-house and we owned the risk, and we outsourced or signed up with subcontractors directly, the manufacturers of the technology. Added together, this allows us to save about $25.8 million over 5 years starting this year, and those are real hard dollar savings. In terms of security oversight, what we have done is, what we've done in terms of data centers and servers, we have taken our 30 computer rooms and developed a plan to consolidate them into 3 to 4 major data centers. First, by starting to consolidate servers in place, in location, by using virtualization technology. And then after that, we're moving those equipment over to data centers that exist at 2 Broadway, at North White Plains, and at Jamaica Hillside. Doing that will allow us to save $13.3 million, and we're in our 2nd year of implementation there. Regarding wide area networks, we had 2 redundant wide area networks that did not completely back up each other. We're eliminating one, enhancing the other so that it could do the work of both networks. And that result is that project is giving us $13.7 million over 2 years. With security monitoring, many of our agencies used to have contracts with IBM, ISS, and other vendors, and those vendors would watch our security perimeter, our firewalls, and advise us of any breaches. We have given all of that work to New York City Transit. Transit had developed a high-end monitoring center, and they could easily accommodate the extra workload, saving us $4.1 million over 5 years. We've also we've completed consolidation in all agencies, and we're working on Long Island Railroad to get together on one common system, Microsoft Exchange, using Outlook as our client. Email is now, we just completed the Business Services Center, and New York City, and Long Island Railroad, which will be using their own infrastructure because of our labor agreement with TCU, will be starting very soon and will be completed before the end of the year. So I'm particularly proud of that one because even though email is not a very complex environment, we have become very reliant on email for emergency response and other critical functions. With respect to help desk and desktop support, we have completed an RFP that allows us to evaluate outsourcing. With a lot of input from McKinsey and Gartner, we could certainly save money on our help desk function. We could save Today, the cost of each help desk ticket is about $40 at the MTA, and by outsourcing, that could drop by almost to a quarter of the cost, so down to $10 per ticket, or by phone call. So doing that is going to be significant, but we don't have an exact figure since responses to the RFP have not come in yet. Desktop support is more complicated since it requires presence on our facilities. So we're going out to the marketplace to check if there are opportunities there, and if there are, we'll definitely look at that. That's for agencies that do not have scope rules with their labor agreements. So that will be all agencies except Long Island Railroad and the BSC. We've also taken strategic sourcing to heart. Instead of certain employees having both a laptop and a desktop, we have asked employees to give up either their laptop or desktop based on business need, and that has allowed us to save $2.2 million recurring by reducing the number of devices that we have to support and we have to purchase and replace. We've also put together our requirements and agreed on high-end laptops and middle-end laptops, same thing with desktops. So we have a standard configuration that will allow us to leverage the purchasing power of the MTA. And that's going to be $1.5 million in recurring costs, because already our purchase costs were low, so it was harder and harder to eke more savings out of that. And we went back to our customers and reduced the number of BlackBerries and cell phone and other MiFi devices based on need, given some parameters. And we got a lot of support from management in recovering some of these devices. Again, the savings there are very significant. I'd like to, at this point, just summarize all of the savings in the next 5 years. Just to comment that these are not in 2010, 2011 savings, and we're on target for completing 2011. We have saved $25 million across all streams, and starting this year and going forward 5 years, we will be saving $77.2 million. We're doing this because there's a significant amount of trust among the CIOs. We're allowing CIOs to do work for each other. We're sharing technical staff who are very, very talented in a certain area across agencies. We meet every week for about 2 hours every Wednesday to work through politics, obstacles, technical issues, purchasing issues, budgeting issues, and it's a very, very good cooperative atmosphere that we've developed over the last 18 months. So having said that, I'd like to see if you have any questions on what you've seen so far, or if you'd like us to focus on any other area in this report.
Well, I, as a matter of fact, I talked to Mike a lot about quantifying what you do, and that sort of quantifies what you do. And just the other day, Mike let me know that I think Tom Prendergast had received a check for $2.8 million, which was a saving based upon our health insurance. So these are real dollars that are saved by our own people, our own internal audit staff, who do a heck of a job.
And I must add that, technology and CIOs as well said a tremendous job in achieving these savings here. And I know they're going to be very aggressive in the future doing more, so they should be commended, for the job you all done. It was a tremendous effort by the CIOs. I mean, there's real money up here that they took upon themselves to eliminate.
Any questions regarding our presentation? Seeing none?
Great.
Thank you
very much.
Our next meeting is in January, and the date is to be determined. We're going to sit down with the new chairman and see what we can come up with. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Thank you.
Thanks so much.